Sixth Sunday after Pentecost, and our proper is Proper 11, and our gospel reading is from Luke's 10th chapter, the story of Mary and Martha. That's 10:38, verse 38. It's right at the end of the chapter. The story of Mary and Martha is short, but it is pithy in its own way. Now, people have traditionally used it to shame us into doing more work, but that probably isn't the part that really gets me excited. It's the way that Jesus avoids being triangulated, being manipulated by Martha, and the way he reminds them that they both have choices. And she chose to do the meal, and Mary chose to listen to him. From his point of view, she chose the better thing. But the story of Mary and Martha is the story of clear boundaries. Jesus has clear boundaries. We talk a lot about boundaries in this day and age. We mostly see people who are addicts who have no boundaries, and they're codependents who have very few boundaries, and we just generally get boundaries all mixed up. Jesus sort of stands head and shoulders over that and says, no, wait a minute. You have choices. You make your choices, and then you live with them. Enjoy them, because that's what you've chosen. Nothing wrong with Martha's choice. Jesus certainly says it's not the better of the two choices, but at some point he and the rest of them would get hungry, and so they're delighted by Martha's hospitality. No doubt. I was thinking about this in the context of the present day, of course. I saw a little clip on, I think YouTube probably. It was an exchange between our Missouri Senator Josh Hawley and a professor whose name somehow I didn't catch, a black woman who works in the academy, obviously a PhD person, and he is questioning her about abortion and asking her if abortion is a women's issue. The professor took umbrage at that, basically saying, we don't live in a binary world of male and female. It's a much more complicated picture than that, and your glossing it over is transphobic. You are missing the importance of trans people. And he sort of wooden-legging it, plays innocent. Oh, you think I'm transphobic, do you? And you think I'm creating violence against trans people? How could you believe that of me? I am innocent of such things. I'm just trying to have a conversation with you. And of course, she's trying to have a conversation with him. I thought it was an abrasive on her part to call him a transphobe, even though that was certainly true at that moment. But not the best way to continue a conversation. But then she was being interrogated, and he was the interrogator. So, she was saying that the boundaries are different. She also reminded us that 1 in 5 trans people commit suicide. that means that they're not much affirmed in our particular culture. Well, this was interesting to me, this exchange, because it made the point that I had not gotten before, that this whole pronoun thing and thinking about trans people in particular is not as simple as it appears, and it is informative, meaning that when somebody tells you, a very feminine looking person says that her pronouns are her, she, and her, she's telling you that she identifies as female. You can look at the person and you can see maybe she isn't originally female, but she and her tells you that's how that person identifies and wants to be identified. So using those pronouns and using feminine descriptors is really what she is asking for. As the interrogation went on, the professor said, well, you know, there are a lot of cis women who can have abortions because they can get pregnant, but there's also a number of cis women, cis meaning that the gender that they were born with is the gender they affirm. They can't get pregnant. Maybe they're past menopause, but more than likely they have some fertility issues. So it's not so easy to say women as a sort of blanket cover for all of these different things that go on, all of these different people. Also, there are trans men who can get pregnant because they were originally women. Those people might say, use the pronoun they and them, meaning they have two genders. They are identifying in the gender male, but they still have the ability to reproduce. Oh, shocker for those people who just think in male and female. But that's, male and female is just too simplistic now. So when she was talking about abortion, she was saying abortion applies to a number of very different people. Now, you might call them male and female, but that's really reductionist. Transphobic's a strong word, but reduction it certainly is. It's reducing to a binary choice something that is much, much more complicated. And it all comes down to choice, choosing. At some point, a trans person chooses to express their identity over perhaps their birth gender. That's quite amazing, actually. It must have been revelatory for the person to come to that thing, and it must have been agonal in some ways. And like any person's understanding, self-understanding, we need to respect that. Now, if someone's self-understanding is male and female, the typical binary thing, think of it as the transgender, the LGBTQ plus people inviting us to see a much more complicated world, and one that better expresses what is actually going on in the world. Well, back to Mary and Martha. Martha, knowing that Jesus is the authority in the room, goes to the authority and asks for him to order her sister, to do the work that she's supposed to do. Jesus detriangulates, as we like to say. He simply says, but what? She made a choice. That's her choice. You made a choice. That's your choice. Both choices are valid. We need to eat, and she wants to hear the word of God that I have to offer. Now, from my point of view, Jesus meaning, she's made the better choice, but still, we appreciate your hospitality. As I say, in the past, this has been used to keep women in their place. A really unfortunate idea, and well, I don't think it's too much to say an act of verbal violence toward women in the patriarchy, putting them in their place and keeping them there. At least that's how it's often been interpreted, but that's not the way it is. The way it is Mary chose to listen. Jesus, as it turns out, was not long for this world, and so Mary's choice was inspired. Martha's choice was important too. She didn't know that Jesus was leaving, and she wasn't as interested, perhaps, in the word that Jesus had to speak. She knew he was important. She wanted to be of service, but she was being of service to an authority and was perhaps not as informed about his importance. It's easy for us to miss the holiness that is in front of us. It just is. When you think about somebody who's gone through the process of understanding themselves not to be the person that their body expresses, and how they've been probably raised to that point, that is perhaps for them an inspired choice. Holiness for them is different than it appears. And so they begin the process of transitioning. They are standing in the presence of their own holy. They are making choices. I think Jesus would have probably said to those trans people, the choice you're making is the better choice. Now, right now we're in a cultural moment where there are probably lots of people who are really excited about the idea of transforming themselves, whether or not their identity is really there or not. There are probably a few people who are who really haven't thought about it that clearly. I noticed in Sweden they do not allow puberty blockers anymore because they say that that's perhaps too young for someone to express their identity in a coherent sense of personhood. I think they may be onto something. I think waiting will not hurt anything, probably. It might keep the drama from happening, as Jesus did with Martha. She wanted him to be dramatic and deal with her sister, and he said no, that's her choice. But that choice is a sacred choice. Hospitality, Martha's hospitality, is as important as Mary's listening to the Word of God. Now, Jesus recognizes it as more important, but they still had to eat. And Martha was doing what she liked to do, but she was a little overburdened. It was a group, after all. And she's trying to put together a dinner, and she was expecting her sister to help. But that wasn't her sister's choice. She saw something sacred in front of her, Mary did, and she chose it. I think all of this shifting of boundaries. Now, as I looked at the clip between Josh Hawley and this professor, they were talking past each other. Hawley was taking on an air of innocent umbrage. Oh, how could you call me that? Which he is not. He knew perfectly well what he was saying, and he was speaking not to her so much as to the people who are his constituents, saying, oh, see, it is a binary world, it is a binary world. And she's saying, no, it isn't a binary world. She could have been more tactful, I think. And unfortunately, the Academy has taken itself off in a very civil way of dealing with these issues. The problem is, in order to recognize the sacred, you have to go through a process. So somebody who's a racist, after all, begins to realize that that person of color that they know is actually a human being, a sacred soul in the face of God. To begin to experience that is a process. It takes time. Just as I, from this clip, suddenly realized the importance of pronouns as self-identifiers. Otherwise, it just sounds like a verbal trick. But it isn't. It's a way of self-identifying, telling you what the internal process of that trans person is. That's a point of vulnerability, actually. That's also a moment of sacred choice. So, and that's what Jesus wants us to do. He wants us to make sacred choices. He wants us to see the sacred in our lives and offer ourselves to it. Now, for many of us, that is not going to be anything very unconventional, but it is unconventional at some level and in some way. So we just need to look at our life and figure out what that is drawing us to make choices to approach the sacred. doing the requisite things we need to do. Moses had to take his shoes off in the face of the burning bush. A trans person begins to an inner journey, but it's also an outer journey. And some trans people go all the way and do surgery, some do not. Some trans males can still bear children. And so as trans males, they are interested in their rights, vis-a-vis abortion, perhaps. But they're probably more interested in their rights as a pregnant male. Well, things to think about. Sacred. Look for the sacred in your life and choose it. That's all Jesus is saying in Mary and Martha, which is, after all, quite a bit. Have a good day.